Adi, is that a new beard? I'm trying to, something looks different. My name is Jumaane Williams, and I'm running for governor of the state of New York.
My name is María Archila, and I am running for lieutenant governor of the state of New York.
Thank you so much for talking with me today, Jumaane and Ana Maria. As longtime comrades in the struggle for justice, I'm thrilled to hold this conversation with you both.
Thank you so much, Adi. I'm honored to be sharing space with you. So I just want to say thank you. And I'm impressed that the computer can say my name right. That's pretty impressive by itself.
Yeah, Adi, what a beautiful moment. Just be in the same virtual space with you and with Jumaane. I remember when you came to New York as part of a tour and did an event in Brooklyn, someplace in Brooklyn. And I just remember the feeling of that event, just like you and Jumaane, like really lifting up a vision of what is possible. And so this feels like a very special moment. And yeah, I am so proud to be running alongside Jumaane and learning from him and dreaming up with him. So,
Jumaane, you are the New York City public advocate. Why did you decide to run for governor?
Great question. And it took me a while to actually decide to run. As public advocate, we're using the tools that we have to move forward a better New York City and a better New York State by extension. And as I started, just looking at what was happening, and at that point, the former governor was still there, and just really thinking of the people who are thinking about it, the people who are pushing forward. I don't know that they're going to push forward the type of New York that I want my then incoming newborn baby to grow up in, and a more just and equitable New York. And then it's like, at some point, if I can just stop advocating and actually have the tools to just do the thing, instead of continuing to push others, if I can just be in the space to actually make it happen, that would be awesome. So, after some back and forth and conversations with my wife, and just decided to do it. This is a rare opportunity. We lost tens of thousands of New Yorkers, I keep saying, during this pandemic. And everybody keeps saying we want to go back to normal. And I keep saying, hold on. I do want to normalize our lives, but I do not want to go back to normal because that didn't work for most New Yorkers. And what we see is people still trying to do normal things that happened before the pandemic that got us here in the first place. And the one thing we can do in the honor of the folks we lost is not go back to normal, the reason that we got so bad in the first place. So I figured it was time to try and step up and see what I can do to make the change I'm pushing for.
Ana Maria, have you always wanted to run for public office? What made you decide to run for LT governor now?
I have never aspired to run for public office, but after 20 years of being a community organizer, building organizations that allow working class immigrants, Black and brown folks, regular people build power together, I looked at the state of New York and just could not sit still and watch the governor allow the moratorium on evictions expire in the middle of the Omicron wave. I could not just sit still and watch the governor propose a budget that excluded immigrant workers from all the forms of support, whether it was unemployment insurance or healthcare, a budget that prioritized and aim to subsidize real estate developers that do not end up building affordable housing, and a budget that sort of continued the same approach to politics that are, give people just a little bit and give millionaires and real estate a lot. And I, after what our communities endured during the pandemic, after all that we have lost, and after all that we have seen about how crushed families are between the cost of housing that just keeps going up and up and up, the cost of childcare that is so unaffordable, and the fact that wages are not keeping up, it felt sort of unacceptable to just do politics of just small solutions. And so I was very excited by Jumaane's bold step to run for governor. I have always been excited by Jumaane's bold steps and inspired by them. And when the Working Families Party asked if we could join forces together, I said yes, because I believe that in this moment, we have to have elected officials that are deeply rooted in the communities that need government to work the most. And that we need people to honor the courage of our communities and of our families who fight for one another. And that's, I think, what Jumaane embodies and what these sort of Articulate Together aims to do in New York. For as long as I have been an organizer in New York, the governor's office has been an obstacle to the things that our communities need, the things that working class families need. It is always the obstacle we have to climb. And the progress we have made is because we have had progressive legislators who are champions, who are deeply rooted in working class communities, who stage really difficult fights. And it doesn't have to be that way. We could actually have Jumaane as governor and have someone who will partner with our communities instead of being an obstacle to our communities' safety, to our communities' need to be housed, to have good jobs, to have access to universal childcare and healthcare. So we don't need to accept the reality of a governor as an obstacle or a lieutenant governor as a silent participant in that way of doing politics. We can have something different, and that's, I think, what we deserve and this moment requires.
You know, the mayor's race, a lot of folks are asking me, I don't usually get drafted, but this is one time folks were asking if I would run for mayor. And I was quite adamant for a while that it's not a job I want. But one of the reasons that governor also made sense is because each time, as a councilman, I realized we needed a citywide response. And then when we were trying to do things citywide, it was the state that was the problem. So it seems to me, going to the state and being there to do all the things that Ana Maria is talking about. And as I traveled, I fell in love with the state when I ran for lieutenant governor. And I traveled the state, Buffalo, Rochester, even Hudson Valley and Long Island, you see cities that are dealing with the same things. They believe it's different than other cities, and there are cultural differences that are unique. But most folks are trying to find housing. They're dealing with public safety issues. They're dealing with schools. They're trying to find jobs, trying to find better schools for their kids. And all these things are aiding to how they live in very similar ways. And it is Albany that everybody's looking at for the assistance. And what a great place to organize some cities who are working on the same issues together.
That is beautiful. Thank you. Starting with you, Jumaane, what do you think are the biggest problems with the U.S. healthcare system and the healthcare system in New York? And what changes are necessary to address those problems?
Healthcare is just more of a business. And whenever someone is focused on making money, that can cloud the decisions that are being made. People often talk about income inequality. I try to talk about resource inequality. I think people should make more money for sure. I don't know if everybody's gonna ever make the same amount, but whether you can live or die because you don't have access to healthcare, it's just inhumane. Whether you can't get access to mental health service that you need because there's no infrastructure there and you can't afford to get the resources is inhumane. And so our system is set up more to make sure that certain folks are making money than to make sure that New Yorkers or Americans can actually get the health care that they need. I've shared, and I'm happy to share here, what my wife and I went through and what she's still going through. She's amazing, dealing with cervical cancer and dealing with our miracle baby who we told weren't going to be here. So we've been raising up the issues of Black maternal health. But I can't imagine what this would have been like if we didn't have jobs that we can take off when we need it, if we didn't have healthcare that gave us access to the best healthcare at this moment in time. Someone's life could have been even in more danger. We're so privileged in that. And that shouldn't be a privilege. That should be what someone's life is. If you're sick and you're ill, you get some time to take care of it, and you have access to the best healthcare to get it. So I believe in universal healthcare. I believe in the New York Health Act in New York State to make sure everybody has access. But it's just money. It's just being able to fund these things instead of allowing all that money to amass in just a few folks' pocket instead of making decisions who's making the money, who's not. I want folks to make money. I just don't want people to make money and some people can't get the healthcare that they need and they lose their lives. We have the money, and in New York State, a budget was held up not because people were fighting to get healthcare. It's because we had a governor trying to get $1 billion to a billionaire, and that's not an exaggeration. And we have a governor who said we can't raise revenue from the very billionaires she's trying to give tax credits to, and we can, and we have to get the things that we need. I think that's why Ana Maria and I are running, because we know what is possible in New York State and we know what is possible in this country. We just have people who are more worried about the people they're supposed to be representing than the seat that they're holding or the job that they want. So I just want to make sure I add it in there.
Yes, I mean, we have a healthcare system that is for profit for the most part. We have a private healthcare system in which there are people who don't have health insurance. In New York, immigrants, undocumented immigrants are excluded from health insurance unless they are in a dire emergency or pregnant. And that's the only moment when people have access to health insurance. And people get sick and go bankrupt. And people get sick and lose their homes. And so we have a system that doesn't make sense in a country that is one of the richest countries in the world and the only rich nation that doesn't have universal health care. So it is a system that doesn't work because it is designed for the most part for profit, and it excludes people, and it doesn't actually address the healthcare needs of most. So in New York, we have several efforts to expand access to healthcare. There is an effort to make sure that immigrants are included in the essential plan that is right now under discussion. There are efforts to make sure that people are not saddled with healthcare debt. But these, of course, are sort of patches to a solution that is very obvious, which is that we should have universal healthcare. We should have Medicare for all. And in the state of New York, we actually have the resources to make it happen. You have led the fight to allow people to understand why Medicare for all is the solution that this country needs for our very broken and very wrong-headed healthcare system. The other aspect of healthcare is the fact that our infrastructure of care is so reliant on the low wages of care workers. Home care workers are essential for people. You, of course, can speak about this like nobody else can, about the role that home care workers play in your own ability to be in your home, to raise your children, to be with Rachel, to do the amazing work you do. And, home care workers are paid very little. In the state of New York, there are people who make $13 an hour as home care workers. That is a policy choice that doesn't have to be a permanent choice. It can change. And so we need universal healthcare, and we need the work of care workers to be respected and valued with good wages, with benefits, with the right to a union, so that we have the infrastructure of care that we all need eventually at the different stages of our lives, from the moment we're born to the moment we transition.
Starting with you, Anna, what is your theory of change? How do we build that better healthcare system, and what role do you see for yourself in that effort?
Well, I think that we build a better healthcare system by investing in our resources, our public resources, in healthcare and all the things that working families need. So in the state of New York, for example, we have a governor that is very interested, that forced, as part of the negotiations of the budget, the inclusion of a $600 million, actually an $850 million investment in a stadium in Buffalo for the benefit of someone who is a billionaire. So instead of putting almost $1 billion in the stadium, we should put $1 billion in healthcare. And we should, instead of subsidizing real estate developers who don't end up building affordable housing, or economic development projects that don't end up creating jobs, we should reorient all of our efforts to building a healthcare system that allow to using the public resources to build a universal healthcare system that will free up people to move between jobs, that will free up people to take care of their families without worrying about losing their income or their homes, without going bankrupt. But I think the way to achieve this is to elect different people. We will not achieve this if we continue to elect people whose alliances and whose power comes from real estate and the wealthy few. So electing someone like Jumaane, whose power really comes from the people that raised, the communities that raised him and elected him and continue to support him, takes bolder and bolder steps. That is the theory of change to achieve a different healthcare system, a truly universal healthcare system. And then centering the voices of people whose lives are at stake. That's what you have demonstrated, Addie, that by forcing our stories to the center of the conversation, we change the conversation and we create a different dynamic. We create a moral ground on which our demands stand, and we make very clear how morally bankrupt a private health system is and how it incentivizes the wrong things.
Jumaane, how have you seen change happen in your time in politics?
Some good, some bad. It seems like pendulum is swinging all over the place right now. That does tend to happen when you actually start getting to a place where people are really talking about equity and justice in a real way. I think folks think you just have to be right and that works. But the most basic of human equality and equity is not just given. I mean, it's not a stretch. I always go back to Civil War. I mean, everybody would say you probably shouldn't have enslaved people, but we had the most bloodiest war in this country over that one issue. And I say that because I think we started seeing, I mean, you saw people talking about Black Lives Matter. You see people trying to push back on these issues. And so there's a visceral pushback on it. Donald Trump actually was a visceral pushback on the way we were trying to move and bring equity and justice to folks who I believe this country never intended it for in the first place. But in New York City, in New York State, it's been pretty amazing to watch. You know, when I first came in, I was told I had to choose between being an activist and being an elected official. And I always said, I don't want the best elected officials are activists. Mm-hmm. And you can push against the status quo and get things done for folks. So I'm just very proud to have tried to model that. I think we had some very, very success. And now in the city council, just amazing. Like sometimes folks are telling me to come to things and I'm like, I don't even really need to. There's so many folks who sound like me or sound like I sounded and are gonna do even more than me in the council now, which is amazing. We just had a NYPD hearing on the mayor's blueprint. And there's a string of folks who came back making sure that certain questions were answered. It was awesome to see. I also see a lot of people dressing different. When I came here, everybody told me I gotta wear my suit and tie, and I was like, nah. And now I see a whole group of folks who are dressing different, so that's pretty cool. But I do think there's a battle now for how people are thinking if we're just gonna stay in politics as usual, or we're gonna move forward. And unfortunately, I mean, it's not just the Republican Party, there's Democrats as well, who are really trying to hold on to the status quo that benefits a few people. And you see people pushing back against that. But it's difficult, you know, that status quo and those elite groups of folks want to maintain that power. And sometimes people say they want to change it up till they get there and they just want to maintain it like everybody else. So I've seen a lot of change, good change even from the time I got there, which is over a decade ago. But I see it, you know, trying to be pulled back and to the same old. You can see that in the elections that came. People kind of focus on one election in New York City, but there's a whole elections up and down the state where there's a lot of folks. You know, this is a longer conversation, but this word progressive, I don't know what it means anymore because Cuomo said he was progressive. Everybody said they're progressive. I love to see people talk about how progressive they are while they're pushing and fighting against progressives. But that just says to me that the progressive ideal is actually the right one. And I think the dividing line is between people who want to not push as hard as they could for those ideals because they don't want to push past their leadership, push past their status quo, because it might affect their election or a job they're trying to get after. And then there's people who will push past their leadership, who will push past the status quo, who will take that risk. And that's the dividing line. And people try to weaponize other things and other words, but it's really that. It's really people who want to maintain our form of oligarchy. And then some of us who don't. And even those who say they don't, who won't push past a certain space that's uncomfortable to get done.
Jumaane, you live with Tourette syndrome and ADHD. Can you tell us a bit about how that has impacted your life, and what access to healthcare has been like for you? What other healthcare moments have you and those closest to you experienced, and how have they shaped your positions on healthcare policy?
Well, my father, may rest in peace, was a physician. My mother was a pharmacist. I often say she was a drug dealer. And my sister is a nurse practitioner. So healthcare has always been big in my home. I got diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, ADHD in high school. So being Black, rambunctious with undiagnosed Tourette's is probably not the best thing to do to try to get through public school. But we got through the public school system. I had a ferocious mom who made sure that she was wherever she needed to be and make sure I was guided in the right direction. But it was difficult to navigate the public school space, but we were able to do it. So that means, of course, healthcare was important to get the diagnosis, to find out. It wasn't even just healthcare, supportive groups. When we found, they changed the name now, but it was Tourette Syndrome Association then, just to be in a space with other people who were dealing these kind of issues. Healthcare has always been important in our community. Healthcare has always been important to me. I almost actually didn't make it. I had, this was going on 6 years, supposed to be routine hernia surgery. This is a lot of information, but there was something wrong. I ended up having to have bowel recession. And so that almost didn't make it out of. I really think, I wasn't believed when I said something was wrong and the pain that I was in, which is another set of conversations. And thankfully, I did have my mom and my sister, both in healthcare, who advocated. Like, I remember I was told they almost called it security on it. It was either my mother or sister because of their advocacy, saying something is wrong, you have to do something. So if any one of those things were different, and I was a council member at the time, if any one of those things were different, I might not be here. You shouldn't have to have those things to make it through. And I will say that my home health care person, who happened to be a nurse who came in, was magnificent. The care that I got after we got out of the hospital was awesome. So being able to see all those things really shapes, but you have to be able to see them, understanding that you have privilege in getting them. Sometimes people see them and don't understand that the privilege they have of getting it, and just believe everybody can have access to it if they want it, or if they just simply work harder. And it's trying to make sure I'm watching it with always an equitable and just lens. So the Tourette's, I think what's been most amazing to me is, one, I was never allowed to use it as an excuse. I have a Caribbean mother, so that's not a thing. You gotta keep moving, gotta keep going. So it's not something I thought about much, but I've realized when I speak to young people, especially those who have something going on in their lives, who may have ADHD, who may have Tourette's or something else, it's inspiring to them. It took me a while to be able to actually accept that as a thing, but I think I'm closer there. I was at the time the only known elected official with Tourette syndrome in the country. That has changed, and that's awesome. There's a young Black man actually in Connecticut who saw me. I get a little choked up when I talk about it, but he saw me and it inspired him. So he got elected, and that's pretty dope. That's probably one of the dopest things that I walk around with in my journey in politics.
I remember when Jumaane won the election for public advocate and used that moment to talk about mental health. and to talk about just like from a very personal experience, just the challenges with mental health. And it was a moment that was so powerful because it's very rare that we have leaders who are willing to be vulnerable. And Jumaane just like marries these like vulnerability with so much strength and resilience, which is why I think people see him and feel so sort of invited in and so inspired and energized and recognized and celebrated because of these way that Jumaane talks about, growing up with Tourette's, growing up with ADHD, the struggles, since then, mental health, the like bringing a baby into the world, despite all the odds, there is something that is just profoundly human that Jumaane is able to sort of embodies all the time. And I think that these like kind of humanity is so lacking in our politics. And the conversation about politics tends to be so focused on this party or this person or that person instead of like people and their stories and their lives and their struggles and their dreams. And so that's when I was thinking about joining or jumping into the fray. This way that Jumaane sort of embodies both the dreams and the struggles at the same time was, and just about healthcare in particular, was really powerful.
Thank you for that. That's pretty awesome. I remember that night, and I thought it was important. I mean, we're talking about healthcare. We should, make sure we talk about mental health and how important that is. People don't have access to it. In certain communities, they have a double barrier because it's not good to talk about mental health and the need to have those services in certain communities. And then if you have the courage to speak about it, you can't access it. I don't know if I'd be healthily married to my beautiful wife and have a beautiful daughter. I've been seeing a therapist, I guess now going on 6-7 years, and it's the best thing I ever did in my life. But again, I had the privilege to access it once I realized that it wasn't everybody else, it was me that I had to try to address. And I wanted to use that moment to let folks know in general, but particularly those who look like me, that this is something we can talk about, we should talk about, we have to talk about. And we have to make sure we have access to the same resources that so many other people have. And what we're dealing with is not unique. Whether you have an acute mental health crisis or not, everybody needs a mental health check-in once in a while.
Thank you. Yes, that is very powerful. Ana Maria, what has your experience, and the experience of your loved ones, been with the U.S. healthcare system?
I, like Jumaane, I was raised by healthcare workers. My mom is a nurse. My dad is a doctor. My stepmother was a school psychologist.
I didn't know that, by the way. That's awesome.
What?
I didn't know that. That's awesome. Thank you, Adi, for getting us together and sharing some things we didn't know.
Yeah, I grew up with this idea that healthcare is a central part of our lives, that our bodies and our minds need care, and that there are people who dedicate their lives to this care. So that's sort of how I grew up. I have been so lucky to be employed in places that offer good health insurance. And so I've always had healthcare when I needed it. But when I started organizing back, 20 years ago in the North Shore of Staten Island, I was working in a community of day laborers, a community of immigrant workers who were mostly undocumented. And I was doing a lot of health advocacy. The local hospitals, Staten Island doesn't have a public hospital. It has 2 private hospitals, or at the time it had 2 private hospitals. And all the immigrant workers and immigrant families that I was talking to were first very scared of going to the hospital, and second, saddled with bills and often unable to access healthcare because the hospital system communicated exclusively in English. I remember I was thinking about this story just a few days ago. One of the people I met was a young woman who had gone into the emergency room, didn't know what was happening to her body, and it turned out that she had an ectopic pregnancy. And the hospital tended to her and did a pretty aggressive procedure on her that left her without the ability to have children of her own. And at no point did they inform her in Spanish of what was happening to her. So I met her. She was 23 years old, indigenous woman from the south of Mexico. I met her and her husband, who were after this surgery had happened. And after she, was realizing that she would never be able to have children. And because our hospital, because the healthcare system did not communicate with people in a language they understood. And so we fought very hard to win language access in government offices, language access in hospitals. And it took many years to win the basic right for people to have access to the information that allows them to make informed decisions about their bodies and their healthcare. So that fight was very formative for me. Having access to health insurance and healthcare is essential, but making sure that healthcare is actually truly available to people requires us to think about the experiences of people from who they are. And that means language access, that means attention to the experiences of gender nonconforming people, awareness about the experiences of people with different abilities. And we are still very far from that. And that is why we need people who actually come from communities that have these experiences and that bring these sort of sensibility to the task of building a more just society.
I want to give each of you 30 seconds to pitch the other. Jumaane, we'll start with you first. Why Anna for Lieutenant Governor?
First of all, Anna is awesome. Second of all, she believes in a truly equitable and just system and understands the work it takes to get there. I also believe that she will do her best to work with me to get that done. I also know and believe that if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, there will come a time where she will let me know it privately and then publicly. And I think that's what this state needs and has been missing in a lieutenant governor for a very, very long time, which is why we got to where we are. And unfortunately, we're still dealing with that. And so New York State is well served by a lieutenant governor like Ana Maria Archila.
Jumaane is awesome. Jumaane is also brilliant, so uniquely able to speak about the realities of New Yorkers who need government to work, New Yorkers who need government to protect the rights of young people to be able to walk in their streets in safety, in dignity, without being sandwiched between violence and over-policing, the realities of New Yorkers who are struggling to stay in their homes because the rent is too high or afraid of evictions, the realities of New Yorkers who are not making enough to make ends meet. And he is not only uniquely able to speak about the experiences of New Yorkers, but also to listen to the solutions that people have. And I have seen Jumaane just energize crowds and remind everyone that democracy is the way that we take care of one another, that by engaging in these work together, we can build a more just society. And he is not just an amazing leader, but one of the most effective leaders we have had in New York City. And we would be so lucky to have Jumaane as our governor.
Thank you, I appreciate that. It was more than 30 seconds though.
Colombians don't do 30 seconds.
And just, my wife, she let me know how much she loved your energy. You have amazing energy with where she is.
That's awesome. She's incredible.
Thank you.
Who is someone you consider to be a hero in your life, and why?
Well, Addie Barkin, you have been a hero in my life. You have just taught me so much about people's ability to walk past all the limitations that life imposes to just bring folks together, to give people hope, but also to invite people to fight for one another. I think there is no one I have learned that lesson more from sort of intensely than you. And there is right now also another person I'm really excited about. She's not in the United States. Her name is Francia Marquez. She's a presidential candidate in Colombia. She's an Afro-Colombian woman, environmental justice activist, working class woman who decided to run for president. And the elite in Colombia kept saying, nobody will vote for Francia Marquez. Who is Francia Marquez? Nobody will vote for Francia Marquez. And she said, fine. Then all the nobodies, come here. I am because we are. We are the party of the nobodies. And she just came into third place of all, there were like 20 presidential candidates. She got the third largest vote. So now she's the vice presidential candidate with the number one. And so she just said, all of those who call us nobodies, that's true. This country has treated us as nobodies and we're not gonna take it no more. I am because we are. So Francia Marquez is my new hero.
Awesome. I just Googled her real quick.
She's amazing.
Awesome. I don't know if I have short answers for this. I'll try. You know, I'm always inspired by people who go above and beyond the odds, especially on behalf of folks who are fighting the same thing. So, you know, I got to check the Adi Bakken box. You know, it's just been an inspiration to see what you're doing. It's just phenomenal. And it helps us, you know, what am I complaining about? Look at Adi, let's keep moving, let's keep going. When I was younger, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Spider-Man, X-Men, they were all heroes, people who were fighting, you know, for others. But I gained inspiration from my mother, my father, in different ways. My grandmother, my wife is phenomenal in the power and the strength that she's showing. My sister went through some horrific health challenges as well. I often think about my ancestors who probably dreamed of me. Pretty powerful. And what they had to go through. And then my faith, Yeshua ben Yosef, Jesus, peace be unto his name, was a revolutionary, and he was always fighting for those who were marginalized. And so I often wonder what book some of the folks who fight against what I'm fighting for are reading from when they talk about the Holy Bible. I think we're reading from two different books based on the stories and the lessons that I learned. I did forget about Miss Jeannie Ned. That's my fifth grade teacher. I always shout her out. They would have kicked me out of school if it wasn't Miss Ned. She had a thing for troublemaking Black boys in particular. She was the first person to recognize. She didn't call it Tourette's. She didn't know what it was, but I remember her saying, "I know you're not doing it on purpose." And that was amazing to have somebody. As my therapist pointed out, the magic of Miss Ned is to have somebody see through all of the bad stuff and just see you. And so that's amazing. So I was to make sure I put her out there.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to get some quality time together. Much love to both of you.
Thank you, Adi.
Thank you for the space, and you stay inspiring me. So thank you so much. Peace and blessing, love and light to you all, and everybody else who helped make this happen. Thank you.
Yes, thanks everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What a treat. Bye.
Adi, if you can see it, that's my new baby.
Mm.
She fell asleep taking the bath.